Jason, how's it going?
Billy, so good to see you, buddy. It's going well. Let's put it that way. I'm out here in Los Angeles for Super Bowl week, and it's been a fun week. So it's good to talk to you.
It's good to talk to you. So you're on Radio Row, right? What is that? What is that like?
Last year, this is our third year of being on Radio Row. 2 years ago in Miami, it was chaos, which is what Radio Row usually is. And it was also a month and a half before the pandemic. And then last year we were down in Tampa and it was a ghost town. And I'm not even kidding when I say that. There was maybe 10 media representatives that were at Radio Row last year, us being one of them in Sports Spectrum. I think we had one or two guests that came through. It was so much uncertainty. The NFL had shut everything down. Nobody was traveling. So it was a much different atmosphere last year. This year, we're back to more normal. I would say we're still a little bit less than where we were 2 years ago, but there's a lot more media here. All the major entities, CBS, Fox, Sirius XM, they're all here this year. So that tells you we're in a much better place.
Yeah, and there's a lot of excitement, obviously. You're a couple days away from the Super Bowl now, and you have a really unique job. For those who don't know, you just mentioned Sports Spectrum. You guys are the absolute best at pulling in that intersection of faith and sports, right? You find the best interviews with players and chaplains and coaches, pretty much anybody in the sports world who has a story to tell. You tell those stories. You host the podcast over at Sports Spectrum. You are heavily involved. And so I've got to ask you, as sort of the resident faith sports expert at Sports Spectrum and in this country, because I think you're the best at it. I really do. But what has been your favorite when it comes to these two teams, right? What has been your favorite faith story to cover?
Yeah, this has been an interesting year because, we're fans of the games as well. So we're watching the Rams and watching the Bengals, and the Bengals are a team that nobody predicted at the beginning of the year. The Rams are a team that a lot of people thought had the potential, but you're not sure. And then once those teams win and go to the Super Bowl, I'm the director of media, so I oversee our team, and, me and two or three other people kind of put our heads together and really think about the relationships that we have with Sports Spectrum. Who are the athletes? Who are the players that we want to cover? We have great relationships with the team chaplains of all of the teams, really in pro sports, not just the NFL. So we talk to the team chaplains. Vinny Ray, who's a former Bengals linebacker, is the team chaplain for the Cincinnati Bengals now. We talked to Kevin Nickerson, who is the team chaplain with the Rams, and they have great stories themselves. So we do interviews with them. But then they're very gracious in kind of giving us some tips on which players to talk to that really just are solid, let's put it that way, in their walk with Christ. And the fascinating thing about it is we knew there were some of these players already had strong faith. If you go to their social media, you see them posting about it. But there are some that you don't realize until you ask a question to them. And one of them is the head coach of the Cincinnati Bengals, Zach Taylor. And you watch that and you're like, okay, I didn't know anything about his faith. We asked a question, or one of the guys here asked a question, and he talked about in order of priority, faith, family, football, and that he was a believer. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that story. So that was good to kind of discover, when you're out here at the Super Bowl. But my favorite is probably Cooper Kupp, because he is the wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams, but he's also the best wide receiver in football this year. I mean, he broke a ton of records. He's the first receiver ever to get over 2,000 yards receiving in a season when you combine the playoffs and the regular season. And I also knew that he was a person of faith, but I got to talk to him this week and ask him a question about what God was showing him and teaching him this season. When you think about, all that he was able to achieve, right? Go to the Super Bowl, break all these records, be the best receiver
that
in
you
football.
have, right? The dreams as a player that you have, being able to achieve those. Yeah.
Right. The dreams. And his answer was, well, I needed to be rooted in my purpose, and my purpose is Christ. And so he needed to be rooted in his purpose for him. And he told me, if this season didn't happen, if they lost all their games, and let's say he got hurt or didn't play or didn't have the achievement, he says he still would have considered this the best year ever because of how he grew in his faith, the relationships that he had with his teammates, the opportunity to grow in his walk with his chaplain and Bible studies and chapel services. So that to me was just refreshing, because from the outside looking in, sure, you hope, that he's walking the walk and talking the talk, but then you get to talk to him directly, and he just lit up when I asked him a question about his faith. And that's really neat to see. And I love when guys do that because they don't get asked those questions too often, Billy.
Yeah, no, I would imagine they don't. And that's why what you do is so important, being able to pull those stories out. I think it helps, fans too, to be able to see beyond the sport. The sport matters. It's why people are there watching. But who are these human beings? Who are the people behind it? And what you just spoke about, purpose, right? What is our true purpose? No matter what your job is, God has called you to a place. And I know that when we talk about media or sports or any place where there's fame and money and these competing things, having people who are rooted is so important. And I wanted to kind of backtrack a little bit into the chaplains because you've talked to a lot of chaplains, obviously, as you said.
Yeah.
What is their job like? I mean, there's chaplains in all different sort of arenas and difficult arenas, but when it comes to sports, the things I just mentioned, right? That the fame aspect, the fear of loss, the reality of loss. What is it like to be a chaplain, in the NFL? I'm just curious.
Well, I think there's an overarching position that every chaplain has, which is part life coach, part pastor, part friend, part counselor, all of these different roles that they sort of play. It's also hard for certain teams this year. In fact, I talked to one of the chaplains this year, and he said, I haven't been able to meet with my guys in person as much because of COVID restrictions. So that becomes a greater barrier or burden, but you just adjust to it and you figure out the best way to still be able to minister to these guys. And that's really what they do. They just minister to these players. They're there to serve them. They do teach Bible study in chapel every week and have a message that they share. They point to Christ. They help walk guys through their relationship with Jesus. They even lead players to begin a relationship with Christ, which is really amazing to watch. They baptize players throughout the year. Some guys I've talked to, some team chaplains have baptized players in the team facility, in the hot tub or in a pool, a cold tub. So there is legit amazing things happening within these, team chaplains and within these teams. But their role is a bunch of different things. Some of them are sort of, for lack of a better word, contracted out through Athletes in Action, and others are actually full-time team chaplains with the team. I talked to the Baltimore Ravens chaplain back in November, Johnny Shelton, and Johnny is actually on staff with the Ravens. John
Oh,
Harbaugh, the head
wow.
coach, said he's too important for us. So he's kind of a character coach, life coach, maybe to use a general term, but he's the team chaplain. And so Johnny is around these players, praying with them. He's on the sidelines during the games. He travels with the team. He's an important member. So the role kind of varies, but it's very much similar for a lot of teams where they're just there to be an asset and a resource spiritually for these players and these coaches, let me add, not just the players, but the coaches as well.
Yeah, and that's an interesting what you just mentioned there. Obviously, football players, they're training, they're doing the physical things they need to do to be good at their job, but the recognition on some teams that it's so important to have the spiritual aspect that you would actually hire a chaplain and have them as part of the team essentially. That's pretty incredible and it would seem really important. So, I mean, I really admire what these chaplains do because I know it helps ground people, keeps them connected, and it's the most important thing we need to be doing, right, is fostering that relationship with Christ. So that is pretty incredible. Now, let me ask you another question. Bengals defensive back Michael Thomas, he has a crazy story because he
Yeah.
didn't have a team a few months. I mean, he was teamless a few months ago, and now here he is heading into the biggest game of the year. Can you tell us a little bit about his incredible story?
Michael is an amazing individual. I've gotten the privilege of knowing him and talking to him multiple times. He's a guy who came into the league undrafted. He was on the 49ers back in 2012 when they made the Super Bowl, but he was a practice squad player who wasn't even playing in the game. He then kind of journeys around the NFL and carves out a niche as a special teams player. He makes the Pro Bowl. He's in the Giants and a couple other teams, and he makes the Pro Bowl with the Houston Texans as well. And then last year, he finishes out his season. He breaks his arm, so his season ends early. And I talked to him in the summertime, Billy, on our show. And I asked him about, I mean, I can tell you more about his journey in a second, but I asked him specifically about football. And he's like, Jason, I don't know. I don't know, but I trust God has a plan. He's a strong follower of Jesus. He trusts in the Lord to direct his path, to direct his steps, like it says in Proverbs. And he's like, if this is the end of the road, this is the end of the road. I'll be okay with it. because God's plan
Wow.
is not one to argue with. So he thought he might be done playing in the NFL, and that went all the way to October. So the season's already started here, and he's sitting at home and being a great dad to his kids and just trying to do the best he can in life. And he gets a call from the Bengals, and they say, "Hey, we want you to come and be a part of our team." And initially, he thought he was going to be on their practice squad and not playing, and maybe just being a veteran who could provide some leadership to some of the younger players on a very young team. And then he's activated in early November, and he's a special teams, player for them, and he's playing in every game. And he has been in uniform and will be this Sunday when you watch the Super Bowl, wearing number 31 and playing on special teams and running down on those kickoffs and those punt returns. And he could not be more gracious. He was so full of gratitude, so full of joy, smiling ear to ear when I talked to him last week. Just so thankful to be in the Super Bowl, but just, understanding that when we think our plans are all set and God can't blow us away, all of a sudden he opens up a door that Michael never saw coming. And now he gets a chance to play for a Super Bowl. Now, Michael also has an amazing story because he lost two really close people in his family to death a couple years ago and had to overcome that, including his mom, I believe, and his sister. So you're
Oh,
talking about
wow.
two people very close to him who have perished. And he was talking about how he kind of had to move forward with that. Grief obviously is different for everybody, and how his faith kind of drove him and helped him through that difficult time. And yet here he is playing in the biggest game on the biggest stage on Sunday night for the Super Bowl. So he's an incredible person. He's gotten a great story, and this might be his last game. He's not sure. He doesn't know. But whatever it is, he's getting this opportunity, and he's got that uniform with the Super Bowl patch on, and he could not be more happy. So I'm a
That
big Michael Thomas fan.
That is amazing. And I appreciate all that background too, because you mentioned the loss of his loved ones and you go back to last summer, you have that, trauma, that, that pain. And then you have that uncertainty of what is my future? And you're talking to him last summer and he's saying, look, whatever God's plan is what I'm going with. And that's the peace we can have in life, right? And seeing that's why I love these stories, seeing that through these people who do amazing things on the field is so incredible. And then the reminder, obviously, when he's called back in and now he's going to play in the Super Bowl, that we
Right?
never know what's going to happen. We never know what God has for us. When we think we're done, we usually aren't. There's something else that he has for us. So
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful. Now, I've got a final question for you, and it may seem like a little bit of a silly question, but I have to ask because it does seem like, and I think it's because people like you are telling the stories more, but it
Mm.
seems like so many people in the NFL and in professional sports, but particularly football, are believers. I mean, there are a lot of Christians in the NFL. Why do you think that is? It's interesting to me.
Well, I think sports and faith, they have a history together, first of all. I mean, there's even just saying the Our Father and praying the Lord's Prayer before a game has been going on for decades and decades. Go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers, who would always say faith, family, and football. And Vince Lombardi was a devout Catholic who went to mass in church every single day. I've talked to some of his players who've told me this. So you see it goes all the way back to the 60s and the 50s. Now, obviously, we're in a different stage of life, but I think a lot of these guys were raised in a faith-based, family, going to church. I think when they get to college, the spiritual um, nourishment that we all crave is intentionally put out there by a lot of college teams. They all have chaplains or character coaches to help these players. And I think the NFL does an amazing job of allowing players to believe whatever they want. But you see guys in the NFL, and certainly all sports really, but in the NFL, they come to the 50-yard line and they kneel in prayer after every game. Meet me at the 50 is a thing in the NFL because players come together and say a prayer. It's just, I think it's very um, well received. I don't know what the reason would be, Billy, other than I think the more people you talk to, the more people you realize there are people of faith out there.
Right.
We don't talk to
Right.
everybody. I would say the NFL is just a microcosm of that, of society. And, they're all in different stages of their faith. They're all in different aspects of their faith. Some believe differently than others, right? But I think it's more well received because in the NFL, when you look at the NFL, it really has this acronym, not for long, right? And they understand that they only have a certain amount of time here. They also understand it's such a physical game, such a painful game in many ways, on and off the field. There's a lot of uncertainty. So what else is going to help them get through this in some cases than a faith that's bigger than themselves?
Yeah.
Athletes get caught up in identity issues, as you know, Billy, and they find their purpose in their sport. And so many of them, when they're done, that's where you really see, I think, a spiritual revival for a lot of athletes, is when they're done and they have nowhere to turn. Where else is their identity going to be placed in? And so when they
Yeah.
hear about the idea that, wait a minute, my identity, who I am, is a child of God, a follower of Christ. It's not about what I do, because that's over. What's going to last forever? That's where faith comes in. And so I don't know if that really answered your question, because I don't know
No, it
100%
did.
why that is, but I just think when you think about the totality of athletes and all that they go through, faith is a huge component in that for so many.
Yeah, and I think no, it did answer the question. I think there's some mystery in it, but there's that perseverance aspect as well. And I think
Yeah.
with sports, it's really the authenticity and the openness of the athletes on Instagram and Twitter and these other places where you see they're not putting out a message just to do it. They're putting it out because it's who they are. It's how they live. And you see that more, I feel like, in sports than you do in some of the other arenas out there. And maybe there are different reasons for that. But I do think about that perseverance aspect too, getting that, that power that you need to get through those difficulties and to perform. I would imagine there's a lot there for spiritual health that helps guide that process along.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the beauties about being here and covering the Super Bowl, by the way, is when I ask questions to people who I think might be people of faith. You don't know 100%, but you're doing your research and you hope that raising a question up about God and asking them about their faith is going to be okay. Most of them light up, because it really is the central, most important thing in their life. And, they don't get to talk about it or ask a lot of questions about it. And when you do that, you see that there's something bigger going on with a lot of these athletes. And it's not always about what they accomplish or achieve on the field, but it's about growth in a bigger, more purposeful way. And to use the platform of football or any sport to point people to Jesus. And that's what we do at Sports Spectrum. We want to use our platform to tell these stories, to point people to Jesus. And I think these athletes are recognizing the same thing, that they want to use their platform, those who are believers, of course, to point people to Christ and let them know this isn't about me. This is about him. I'm just here on this stage and trying to honor him with everything I got.
All right. Well, with that said, I appreciate your time. I know you got a lot going on out there on Radio Row, Podcast Row, but where can people follow you over the next days as we get closer to the Super Bowl? And then, beyond that, if they want to hear these amazing stories that you're telling.
Yeah, so the best place this week is sportspectrum.com, which is our website, but also to check out our social media pages, because we're sharing a lot of clips of different interviews that we've conducted, people that we've talked to. So the best place is probably sportspectrum.com, and then social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. Check those out. And afterwards, certainly, our podcast, Sports Spectrum's podcast, will have a ton of these interviews on there. They have other interviews that we've done previously over the past few weeks preparing for this Super Bowl. So it's kind of crazy this week, Billy. When we come here, we don't know exactly what we're going to get. We usually walk out of here. God blows us away with the different interviews we get. And again, we just want to point people to him. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thanks for sharing the stories with us. We'll have you back sometime soon.
Absolutely, Billy. Thanks, buddy.